Welcome back, CSC230 to part 2 of our exercise 10, which is our button flex review. And all we did in the first part was make 4 buttons that are red with white text on a light green background, and we have a little separation between them and they center on the page. And how we did that was we gave our body a width of 80%. And we did margin auto, so any element in there should center. But that's not actually what centered the buttons. What centered the buttons was we have a nav element that also has a nav class. So whether we use the dot or without the dot, it still works. But we just use text align center because we basically have 4 buttons in there. And we put padding in there. Padding basically creates the space around the nav element. And what I mean is, if we just put a background color on here, and I'll put light green, and I'll refresh that. That's our nav element. This thing is our nav element. So we have padding around there. It's 80% because everything on the body is 80%. So this nav element is 80% of the page. So, and it's centered on the page. So whatever we do here, that element is saved. Now what makes this stuff centered is text align center. If we didn't have that, if this style or this declaration wasn't here, and I'm going to do command question mark, if that wasn't there, it would just go to the left. It wouldn't automatically center those buttons, but we're using text align center, so that's what we used here. So I'll do command question mark to uncomment that. So that's what we have so far. Now I don't need this green background, so I could take that away, but I just wanted to show you what the nav element is. Now what we're going to do is make an element for paragraphs. And we're going to do 4 paragraphs, and we're going to do 2 sections. So we'll do kind of 2 rows, and we'll make them each sections, and we'll call them like row 1 or row 2. So I'll go down here, and I'm not going to do anything yet because I'm still in styles. I didn't even make my HTML. So we'll go back here, and after nav, I'm going to do section, and we'll give it a class of row. We'll just call it row for now. I don't know if it's going to be row 1 or 2, but I'll do section.row. And then inside there, each one is going to have 2 paragraphs. So I'm going to put inside, and I'm going to type P times 2. And then inside there is going to be lorem 30. And I think it's going to be section row times 2 as well, because we're going to have 2 rows, each with 2 paragraphs. We'll see how this works. If not, we'll try it again. Let's see what happens. I'll just hit tab here. See what happens. And if it doesn't work, backspace, put the 0 again, then hit tab. And let's see if this worked. Yes, it worked. There's section class row with 2 paragraphs, and here's section class row with 2 paragraphs. Now we could change these names to like row 1 or row 2 if we need to, but right now we'll just keep them with the same class name. Remember, with class names you could reuse them. And let's see what this looks like when we refresh, and that's what we want. But we want 4 blocks, so we want the first section to be a flex and the second section to be a flex. Now we're going to have a little issue when we do that, and I'll show you what I mean. Is we can go to styles, and we can use just the row. We could just type in row. We don't have to put section row. If we did, we would put section.row without a space. Because remember, with a space, it means the row class inside of there. And without a space, it means section with the name row. So we can use section with the name row, or just get rid of it. You might think, well, which would be better? Well, if it helps you to know that you're identifying the section, then leave it there. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So what we'll do here is display flex. Remember, that puts it in that flex box mode. And by default, it just puts it on row. So we'll put display flex. So anything inside there, those paragraphs inside there, should go side by side. And when we do that, that looks okay. Now, when I did it before, it was kind of making them separate. Now, they still may not be lined up correctly, and we may have to fix that, and I could show you how to fix that. But we're going to do something called column gap, and if that doesn't work, we could always do a padding left, because I know in Firefox I saw there was times when the column gap didn't work, but we can do column gap. Now, where would column gap be? Would it be here? And I'll put just 36 picks to see what if it works. Should it be here? I don't know. I forget. Let's see. That works. Yes. That'll work. And are they lined up? I don't think they are. I did another one and they were really off. And what we had to do was use the items. Now the items, remember, are the paragraphs. So to identify those paragraphs, I would do this. I would do dot row and then a space and P, because the paragraph's inside of row. And we could do something called flex.grow, and we'll put 1. And we'll do flex.basis, which is a width. Now you can put a width amount, but I'm just going to put 0, which means it's not going to be initial. It means it's not going to be default, so they should make them even. Now, if you don't believe me, let's just check it out. So I'll hit run here, and I'll hit refresh. Now see if these things line up. And now they do. Now there's, yeah, they look fine now. They lined up. And that's all we need to do for that. Our font size looks a little bit small. We could go a little bigger if we want, but I'm going to leave it like that because that's what my sample was like. I'm not going to do anything else right now. Now, that's all I want to do with those paragraphs. I didn't do anything else with that. But what I do want to do is I want to see when this thing breaks. So we could do some responsive design here. And to check out what's going on, if you do control or right click on it and just do inspect, you could kind of move this to see what's going on. So I want to see when the buttons start to break. 770, 750. It looks like they break right at, actually right now they break at like 705. So maybe I'll say 720 or something like that. So what I could do is take away some of the space at 720. I don't want to break these yet. These still look okay, but maybe at 720. So again, that's 720 about there. That's close enough before they break. They break at about 704, but I'll break it at 720. And remember, if you go here and you look for responsive, I'll go to media queries right away, responsive media queries. And I'll just copy one of them. And I like to use max width, so I'm going to highlight that. I'll just copy that, max width, and we'll change that to 720. And to do media queries, I'm going to go down here and type media queries, and then I'm going to highlight it and do command question mark, and then I'll put dashes to really make them separate, and then I know my media queries are down here. So there's my first one. I'll make it 720, and I'll put my closing curly brace and put some space in there. Now what's going to happen at 720? Well, we can take some of the space out of our buttons. Now where do we do that? Here's button, do we use margin? Yeah, we used margin here. So we can do that. I'll highlight this whole thing. I'll highlight the whole button declaration, and I'll put it in here. We're not going to use all that stuff, but I'll put it in here. I'll hit tab, put button, and then I'll highlight these things and tab these over. Remember, you can highlight and hit the tab key. It's something you don't want to do when you're using Word or something like that, but that's fine. There's button. And the only thing we want to change here is margin. So I'll delete all the other ones, and maybe I'll just put it at 3, just to make it a little bit smaller. And then also our nav, remember our nav has 2M padding all around. Now let's change that. This is just at 720. Tab these in. I don't need text align center because we're not going to change that, but we are going to change padding. Instead of 2M, let's change it so it's 2M on the top and bottom, and then a space, and then I'll click here, make sure it's not highlighted. I'll click here, put a space, and I'll put 1M, and I'll tab this over, and that's okay right now. So not a whole lot's changing. I'll refresh it, and let's see what happens now. At 720, they should get a little closer together. A little bit, ever so slightly. So they don't start to break yet. So now they break at about maybe 640. So at 640, maybe we'll make these all single, even though these paragraphs are okay to read. But at 640, maybe we'll put everything together. So we'll put a second query. And I'll highlight this whole thing. And here's our second query. And I'll put this one at 640. And we don't have to change this. So if nothing's changing here with the buttons, well, we could leave that for now. And the nav, that's not going to change either. But what we're going to do is actually make them stack. We'll make them stack, and we'll make the paragraphs stack as well. So how do we do that? Well, the button, we can actually make it a block. Let's try this. We could go button, and we could put display block, because right now it's inline by default. We'll put display block, and that should stack them. Let's see if that works. So at 640, they should stack on each other. And they do, except they're not centered anymore. We have to adjust that. I'm not sure why they're not centered, because now they're blocks. It's text aligned, so they're not working like that. So they're kind of centering over in that little area, so we'll have to adjust that. And let's do our paragraphs. And we don't have to do our paragraphs, we just have to tell this thing, section row, to display column. So let's just highlight this whole section here. And I'll tab these over, tab this over, and remember it's called flex direction. And it's column, because when you make it flex, it becomes a row. So let's do flex direction, colon, and choose column. And column gap shouldn't matter. I'm just going to take that out. And see if that works when we get it to 640. And there, that looks fine. Now we still have to center these things, and we will stretch them out a little bit. And we have to put some, looks like margin. We could do like a margin bottom in there when they get over there. Let's go like 12 pixels for now and just see what happens. All right, that's good. Those buttons look okay. We'll stretch them out a little bit, and we could just put extra padding in them. Remember, the padding for the buttons initially are like 1em, 5em. I'll just take this and highlight it, copy it, bring it down here. Remember, this is top and bottom, and let's make it like 3em on the right and left. Refresh it. Move these over here. Now again, all we have to do still is center these in this area. Actually, I think this margin auto may be for the buttons, so that there's margin on either side. Let me cut this out of here and put it on button. See what happens. Now we already have 0 and 3 pixels. Remember, this is up and down, and this is 3 pixels. Okay, what happens here? The issue we're having here is we have a couple margins here. We have margin, and then we have margin bottom, which is kind of overriding. And now I'm putting margin auto. Now what we actually want, we want to keep margin bottom as 12 pixels, and we want to keep margin auto. So let's get rid of this. Now, if we have different margin settings here, it'll always use the second one last. So let's make sure that actually we have margin bottom last, because it'll apply the margin auto all around, and then it'll put margin bottom last. So it won't override that. So let's see what happens. So we got margin auto on either side. Let's see what happens when we do this. This should center it when we get to 640. So when we get to 640, there, they're centering now. And again, why that's happening is because we're adjusting the buttons, because they're block elements now, and we're putting them at margin auto, which means there's going to be space, even space on either side. And then in addition, we're putting 12 pixels below. by using the margin bottom. So it's not overriding anything that's up there. So it's still keeping margin auto on the right and left, but because we have margin bottom below here, and we're getting rid of the other one. So that looks okay. And I think that's all we need. So let's close this up here and just see what it looks like. So full size, it looks like this. And then when we get to about 720, the buttons get a little closer together. And then finally they get like that. And that's all we want. So that's all we're reviewing here. And again, there's no kind of black and white with CSS. There's always little things we have to kind of adjust, and that's what we're doing here. We have two media queries, one at 720, one at 640, and we're just kind of making little edits here to make sure things centered, just so we're kind of flexible about it. And I just wanted to review this to kind of get away from our typical layout that we were working on in our previous ones and just kind of isolate them a little bit better. And I'll still give you another exercise to kind of work on this on your own, but I wanted to do this as a little bit of a review. So that's all you have to do for this one. This is EX10, and this is showing up here, by the way, because there's a 1 first and it's in alphabetical order. And all you have to do for EX10 for unit 13 is just indicate that it's finished. And I'll be able to check in your repel and see that it's done. So that's all you have to do for this. We're going to keep moving on with some forms and a little bit of JavaScript to finish up the semester. But for now, we're going to do a little review with buttons and flex, and hopefully that helps a little bit. And it gets away a little bit from what we were doing in our other exercise. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Hopefully it doesn't confuse you even more. But that's EX10.